The call came at 5:47 a.m. I noted it in my Moleskine, June 14, 5:47 a.m. 74 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the southwest. Smells like a rain that has no intention of showing up. Then, capped the pen, tossed the last third of my gas station coffee out the window, and drove east on Route 9 into the climbing sun. I note everything. Time, temperature, smell of the air. It started as discipline and turned into compulsion, and I've stopped trying to separate those two things because the line between them is thinner than county surveyors would like you to believe. The high desert at that hour is all amber and shadow. The mesas cut the sky into portions. There's a kind of violence in how beautiful it is out here. The land doesn't care if you're having a good morning or a catastrophic one, it just keeps doing what it does, which is to say it endures, and it makes you feel personally inadequate for not enduring better. I'd been in Cienega County 6 months. I'd come from Albuquerque, which meant everyone already had an opinion about what I didn't understand. They weren't entirely wrong. Dispatch had given me the basics: reported property alteration, east pasture, fence line between Deering and Callaway properties. Complainant, Wade Callaway. Alleged party, Holt Deering. No weapons confirmed. No injuries. I wrote, no injuries. Yet. Crossed it out. Wrote it again. The Deering Ranch sits 8 miles east of the town of Cielo, at the end of a caliche road that turns white and chalky in summer and swallows truck tires in spring. The gate has a brand worked into the iron AD inside a diamond, and the sign below it reads Deering in hand-stamped metal letters where the E sits slightly lower than the others, like it got tired of standing at attention and nobody made it get back up. Past the main house, low adobe, rusted water tank, a single cottonwood that had no business being that alive in this climate, I drove the 2-track east for half a mile until I saw the trucks. 2 of them. Parked 30 feet apart on opposite sides of a fence line that was, as of approximately 3 that morning, in the wrong place. I want to be precise about wrong place, because the whole thing rests on it. Last year, the county widened Route 9 slightly. Enough to require a new survey of adjacent properties. The surveyor drove in, set his pins, produced a plat map. The map showed that the existing fence dividing Holt Deering's east pasture from Wade Callaway's north pasture was 14 feet off the legal boundary. Not 40. Not 100. 14 feet of grama grass and creosote. Maybe 200 yards long. Legally, those 14 feet belonged to Holt Deering. They had been occupied by Wade Callaway's crossfence, a secondary fence Wade built 12 years ago to manage his cattle rotation, for every year of Wade's memory of building it. The county sent letters. The county offered mediation. The county then got distracted by an actual emergency on the far side of the county and let the whole matter sit in a pile for 9 months. At some point in those 9 months, Holt Deering stopped waiting. He was standing at the new fence when I pulled up. The new fence was where the legal boundary actually was 14 feet east of where Wade's crossfence stood, which meant that for a 200-yard stretch, there were now 2 parallel fences with 14 feet of dry grass between them. The wire on the new fence was tight. The posts were driven straight. Whoever had done this work had done it properly, in the dark, by the kind of muscle memory that takes decades to build. Holt was leaning against the new fence. One boot up on the bottom wire. Hat low. Coffee thermos in one hand. He wasn't looking at me when I climbed out of the patrol truck. He was looking at the posts. "Mr. Deering," I said. "Deputy." He said it without turning his head. Like my arrival was something he'd accounted for and wasn't particularly exercised about. I came to stand about 6 feet from him. Between the 2 fences, the 14 feet of contested grass caught the early light and looked, in that specific way that contested things sometimes do, entirely ordinary. "You want to tell me about the fence? I expect you can see the fence." I could see the fence. I wrote fence visible and, then, felt mildly idiotic about it. The county surveyor's pin is right there. He lifted his chin toward a small orange flag about 30 feet north, still in the ground from last year's survey. Legal boundaries there. My fence is on the legal boundary. That's a fact. You moved it at 3 in the morning. The coyotes don't keep office hours either. He said it flat. No humor in it. Or maybe all humor in it. I was still calibrating his register and didn't have enough data yet. I wrote, coyotes. Possible deflection. Possible dry wit. No facial effect visible. Then, Wade Calloway's truck door opened. Wade was a bigger man than Holt, broader through the chest, with the kind of permanent sunburn that had moved past red years ago and become something structural. He walked like a man who owned the ground he was standing on, which was approximately half the problem. Deputy. He came across and shook my hand with the practiced warmth of a man who'd shaken a lot of hands in difficult situations. I appreciate you coming out. This right here is vandalism. It is my property line, Holt said. Your claimed property line. The county claimed it for me. Saved me the trouble. Wade turned to me. That fence has been in the same place for 12 years. His father put the original post in 1987. You can't just. My father put the original boundary fence in 1971, Holt said. Then, you put your cross fence 14 feet into my property in 2012. I've been running my cattle in a pasture that's legally short by a 200-yard strip for over a decade. He said it like a man reading a balance sheet. Just the numbers. No inflection to suggest the numbers had any emotional content at all. You should have come to me. A silence came down between them like a third party arriving uninvited. I did, Holt said. Quiet. Very quiet. I came to you in September. Wade opened his mouth. Something passed through his face, not guilt exactly, but the cousin of guilt that lives next door and borrows guilt's tools. He recovered. Started in about the courts, about proper channels, about his grazing rotation and his investment in the crossfence infrastructure. He did not mention September again. I was writing fast, and not all of it was about the fence. The conversation went 40 minutes. I let it. In property disputes, the first 40 minutes are mostly two men taking turns explaining why I should already agree with them, and the useful information lives in what they leave out. What Wade left out, September. What Holt left out, almost everything. He had the quality of a man managing something large and internal. Not rage. Rage always reaches for volume. This was something that had gone very still, the way still water is still because it's deep. He answered direct questions in the fewest possible words. He did not volunteer. He looked at the fence with an attention that wasn't about the fence. And his hands. His hands did things independently of his composure. He'd touch a fence post and stop. Let his fingertips rest on the wire and remove them as if he'd touched something hotter than expected. The third time he did it, I stopped writing. The post he kept finding was the fourth one from the north end. It looked exactly like the others, same steel T-post, same depth, same angle. But Holt's hand went back to it the way a tongue goes back to a sore tooth, not conscious of doing it, just doing it. I filed it under irrelevant. Moved it to relevant 30 seconds later. Deputy, what I need to know, Wade said, is whether there's going to be legal action. I'm going to need statements from both of you, I said. Mr. Deering, would you sit in my truck for a few minutes? In the truck, Holt had his hat off, thermos on his knee. 59 years old and, looking like 59 had started at 30 and taken its time getting there. The scar along his jaw was old silver. The skin around his eyes had the permanent crinkle of someone who spends most of his life squinting at something bright and far away. Standard questions. He answered them in the minimum viable number of words. When had he moved the fence? Why hadn't he pursued legal channels? Had he given Wade Calloway notice? At the last one, I gave him 9 months of notice. I wrote it down. Mr. Deering. I put down the pen. Off the record. Why now? He looked at the fence through the windshield. A long time. Had a good crew in May, he said. Fencing goes easier with a good crew. Not the answer. But, I heard what was carrying the answer, that flat delivery that means the words are a container for something that isn't the words, and you don't pressure a container before you know what's in it. I took his information. Told him I'd be contacting the county assessor and, probably the DA's office. Let him out of the truck. The sun was up fully now, working at everything with the commitment it has at altitude in June. I stood on the caliche with my notebook and watched Holt walk back to his fence and Wade walk back to his truck, and I thought about how two men can stand in the same square of desert for 40 years and still see completely different ground. I called Sheriff Briggs, who was, I'll remind you, in Albuquerque at a training conference on de-escalation techniques. The universe has opinions. Deering moved his fence, I said. A pause. Which Deering? Holt. Longer pause. God Almighty, Briggs said. That's one way to put it. You know about the boy? I had my pen out. Tell me. Not my story, Briggs said. Just go easy on him, Callahan. There's a property dispute and, then, there's whatever that man is doing out there. You know the difference. I knew the difference well enough to sit with it in the heat, watching a fence that was in two places at once depending on who you asked, until the hawk over the east pasture finished its long descending circle and disappeared. I wrote 3 pages of official incident report that afternoon. Careful. Neutral. The county surveyor's documentation, the legal standing of each party's position, Wade Calloway's formal complaint, Holt Deering's stated justification. Then, I opened a fresh page and wrote, the 4th post from the North End. Stared at it. Drove back out to the Deering Ranch at 4. Holt was on the porch in a wooden rope chair, looking at the mountain range in the middle distance, not rocking, just sitting the way men sit when they've been sitting in the same place their whole lives and, the sitting has become a form of argument with the world. He saw the truck. Didn't move. I'm off duty, I said, climbing the steps. That a fact. Can I ask you something personal? He looked at me. His eyes were the color of dry creek mud, not beautiful, but entirely specific to themselves. You can ask it. The 4th post from the North End, I said. Why that one? He was quiet for long enough that a hawk could have finished a circuit. The wind moved the cottonwood. Then, that's where Cody worked. I kept my face even. That whole stretch, North End. He worked it in March, 3 years back. We were checking the whole line for freeze heave, resetting posts that had shifted. Cody took that section. He looked at his thermos. He was good at it. Set them straight. Better than me, honestly. Always better than me at the patient things. I waited. He died in June of that year, Holt said. Tractor accident. East Field. He was 23. He said it the way a man says the weight of something he has carried until it has become as ordinary as his own hands. Not numb. Not raw. Just incorporated. The grief was structural. It was holding something up. I did not write it down. I always write things down. It is a reflex. A coping mechanism. The closest thing I have to control in any situation. I did not write this down. I'm sorry, I said. He nodded once. That why you moved the fence now? He picked up the coffee. Cold by then. Drank it anyway. Wade's cattle been grazing right up against my line, he said. That 14-foot strip. 3 years they've been standing there. He looked at the thermos. I reckon I got tired of watching them stand on that ground. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. I drove back to town in the dark. My apartment is 2 rooms above the hardware store, smells like turpentine and old carpet, and has a kitchen table that wobbles unless you put a folded paper towel under the south leg. I sat at that table and opened the Moleskine to the page where I'd written the 4th post from the North End and I read it back. Below it I wrote, not a property dispute. Below that, Wade Calloway is about to find out what that means. I thought about calling Briggs. I thought about the injunction that would almost certainly be filed within 48 hours and the county court process that would, if everyone behaved rationally, resolve this in 6 to 18 months. I thought about a man sitting on a porch in the dark that I was fairly certain he was currently sitting on. I thought about a 23-year-old who set fence posts straight and tight and better than his father in March and was dead by June. I closed the moleskine. Opened it again. Wrote, "The wire on that section runs tight. Every strand." I checked it on the way out. Wade filed for an injunction on Friday. County court moved to freeze any property modifications pending adjudication. The order was served. Holt signed for it at his door with the same quality of presence he'd had at the fence there, and also somewhere past there, somewhere the paperwork wasn't going to reach. "I expect they'll want me to move it back," he said. "Yes, sir. I expect I won't. Mr. Deering, son." He looked up. Not affectionate. Not dismissive. The word a man uses when he wants you to know he's been living long enough to know things you haven't gotten to yet. There are lines a man doesn't cross twice. You follow me? I followed him. I wrote it down anyway. The pre-hearing mediation was scheduled for Thursday. A district court mediator named Judge Alva Reyes, who had been running property disputes in Cienega County for 15 years and, who, Briggs had told me, could smell entrenched stubbornness from a hallway. She was going to have something to smell. I drove out Wednesday morning. 90 degrees by 9. I found Holt in the barn, working on a water pump with the methodical focus of a man who fixes things because it's the only response to a world that keeps breaking. He looked up. Didn't stop working. "Mediator conference tomorrow," I said. "I know it." "Planning on going?" He set down the wrench. Picked up a different wrench. "I'll be there." Something relaxed in me. "Good. Won't change my position," he said. Something tightened right back up. I'd rehearsed the legal speech twice on the drive. Standing in his barn in the morning heat with the smell of hay and machine oil and old wood, it had the weight of a document from a different country. "Holt," I said. "Is the fence worth it?" He considered it. Actually considered it, not defensively but, genuinely, the way a real question deserves a real answer. "It's not about the fence," he said. "I know that. But, the fence is what I've got." He set the second wrench down. "The rest of it, 3 years gone. But, the fence is right there." He looked at his hands on the workbench. "I'm going to put it where it goes. I'm going to put it where Cody put it. And, Wade Calloway's cattle are not going to stand on that ground." He looked up. "That's not stubbornness. That's just what's left." I didn't move. I didn't write. The pump dripped in the silence between us. "All right," I said. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Holt heard the difference. He nodded once and picked up the wrench. The mediation conference went how I expected it to go. Holt sat across from Judge Reyes and Wade and Raymond Toole, Wade's attorney, who wears pressed Wranglers to court as a deliberate statement, and talked for 11 minutes once about why and answered questions in the smallest possible number of words, which in a mediation context reads as non-cooperation, which is going to become a problem. Mara Deering called Thursday night. Holt's daughter, from Albuquerque. Precise voice. Rehearsed and aware of the rehearsal's limits. He wouldn't negotiate, she said. It wasn't a question. He was polite, I said. I'll be there Friday, she said. And then, before she hung up, quieter, he moved the fence because of Cody. Not a question. I didn't answer it as one. I know, I said. That night I drove out to the East Pasture Road and parked without lights. The desert dark at this elevation has a weight to it. Stars you can't see from anywhere with a traffic light. I sat and watched the country. There was a small unsteady light down by the new fence. A flashlight. Holt was at the fourth post. Standing with his hand on the wire. The flashlight pointed at the ground. The darkness of the East Pasture rolling away behind him for 1,000 acres, black and endless and indifferent to all of it. He didn't move the whole time I watched. I started the truck. Drove back. In the Moleskine, June 19, 11:04 p.m. 64 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind stopped. He's not going to move the fence. This is going to get worse before it gets to anything else. I looked at that last line for a while. Then, I turned the page, because there was nothing to add to it, and sometimes a sentence is just what it is. Outside, the desert held its breath. The fourth post held its wire. Some things you hold as long as you can. Then, you hold them longer. Mara Deering drove an 8-year-old Subaru and parked it in front of the Deering ranch house on a Friday afternoon that was trying hard to break 100 degrees. She got out in the particular way of people who had been rehearsing their arrival for the duration of the drive, composed and braced at the same time, the way you hold a door open in a wind. I was there because Holt had called me, which was the first time he'd called me instead of the other way around. He hadn't said why. He'd said, "I expect you might want to be here when Mara comes," and he'd said it in the same register he used for weather observations and legal facts, which told me he was already doing something with the grief that I didn't have a name for yet. Mara was 31. She had her father's eyes, that specific Dry Creek mud color, but none of his stillness. Where Holt was the kind of person who occupied a space like a load-bearing wall, Mara moved through spaces like she was solving them. She shook my hand first, then her father's, and I watched them look at each other the way two people look at each other when they are both holding the same old argument and have been holding it long enough that they've stopped needing to say it out loud. "Dad," she said. "Mara." He held the handshake one beat longer than a greeting. "Let it go. Comin' out of this heat." I sat on the porch while they talked inside. Not eavesdropping, I could hear the shape of the conversation but not the words, and the shape was a familiar one voice asking careful questions in a measured register, and one voice answering in the fewest syllables necessary. Mara wanted to understand the legal situation. Holt appeared to believe the legal situation was self-explanatory. After about 20 minutes, Mara came out and sat in the second porch chair with a glass of water that was already sweating through her fingers. "He's not going to move it," she said. "I know. Does he understand contempt of court? Does he understand that he understands?" She drank the water. Set it on the porch rail. The cottonwood threw a small shadow across her feet, doing its best against the afternoon. "He didn't tell me about any of this," she said. "For 3 months he's been sitting on this surveyor's report and I didn't know. I found out from my cousin in Cielo." She looked at me sideways. "He told you about Cody?" Not quite a question. Not quite an accusation. "He mentioned him," I said carefully. "He doesn't mention him. Not to me. Not to anyone." She turned the glass in her hands. The ice had given up. "He mentioned Cody to you after knowing you 3 days, and he has not mentioned him to me in 18 months. I didn't know what to do with that, so I wrote it down in the Moleskine without looking down at the page, the way you're not supposed to write things down, and Mara watched me do it." "Do you always do that?" she said. "Pretty much." "Does it help?" "Jury's out," I said. Something in her face relaxed slightly. Just slightly. Like a knot that has been pulled tight for a long time meeting, for a moment, a little slack. June 21, Friday. 6:14 p.m. 97 degrees Fahrenheit. No wind. The kind of heat that has already decided it's staying. The Deering-Callaway East pasture fence ran 200 yards, north to south, along the back edge of the two ranches' shared high desert boundary. On the Callaway side, 63 head of mixed Angus cattle grazed the north pasture. On the Deering side, 80-plus head of crossbred stock worked the same dry grass. The water situation on the Deering side was managed through a solar pump system, 3 stock tanks positioned across the east pasture, fed from a buried line running back to the main ranch well. The system had been in place for 8 years. Holt had installed it himself the summer after his wife Diane left, which tells you something about how some men do grief. They pipe water. Saturday morning, the pump read fine. By Sunday evening, the east pasture tank was dry. I found out Monday, when Holt called me again. 2 calls in 1 week from a man who regarded the telephone as a mild imposition. "The line's cut," he said. "What line?" Waterline. East pasture, about 60 yards south of the fence. I drove out. The cut was clean, not a break, not drought crack, not equipment failure. Somebody had put a shovel in the caliche, located the line, and taken a blade to it. The cut was deliberate the way a decision is deliberate, with weight behind it. Holt crouched next to it with the same expression he used for everything, which was to say none. His hat shaded his face. His hand rested in the dry dirt next to the cut line. "Wade?" I said. "I expect so. Did you see anything?" "No. I took photographs. I noted the cut's characteristics: clean edge, no tool marks consistent with equipment. I walked the fence line north to south and found nothing else disturbed. The new fence Holt had put in was still standing. The fourth post was still there, which I noted without noting why I was noting it. "I'll file a report," I said. "This is property damage." "If you want to pursue, I'll fix the line," Holt said. "Holt, that's how it's going to go." He stood. Brushed the caliche off his knee. "I'll fix the line." He looked at the 63 cattle on the Callaway side of the fence, grazing in the heat. He looked at his own 80 head, pressing toward the dry tank. "My cattle need water," he said. "Not a court date." I went to see Wade Callaway that afternoon. I want to be clear, I had no proof. What I had was a clean cut and a timeline and 11 years of working with law enforcement long enough to know what deliberate looks like. Wade was civil. Wade was always civil, which was its own kind of armor. He offered me iced tea. He sat at his kitchen table with his hands flat on it and told me he didn't know anything about any water line, and he said it with the specific calmness of a man who has decided he knows exactly where the line is between what you can prove and what you can only suspect. "You need to be careful," I said. "This is escalating. I'm not the one who moved the fence, Deputy Wade." I stopped writing. I looked at him across the table. He was 63 years old and had been ranching this land his entire life and had 3 children and a wife who brought me iced tea and went back to whatever she'd been doing without making eye contact. "I'm asking you, as a human being, separate from the legal process, let this go through the court. Let the court decide the 14 feet. He looked out the kitchen window at the north pasture. "That fence," he said, "has been in the same place since before that boy was born." He said it quietly. He said it like he was talking about the fence. "I drove back to town and rode in the Moleskine," he said. "That boy." I stared at that. He said that boy the way you say it when you're talking about something larger than the fence. It was Mara who told me about Eli. Thursday evening. She'd stayed the week, working remotely from Holt's kitchen table with her laptop and a deeply strained Wi-Fi signal, mediating between her father and a situation that her father had stopped treating as mediatable. She called me at 7 and asked if I wanted to meet at the Roadrunner Cafe, which is the only restaurant in Cielo that stays open past 6 and which serves green chili that is not responsible for any decisions made after eating it. She ordered coffee. I ordered pie that I didn't eat. "You know about Wade's youngest," she said. It wasn't a question, and the way it wasn't a question told me she'd been deciding whether to say it for a while. "Eli?" I knew the name from the family documentation. Youngest of Wade's 3 children. Moved away about 3 years ago. I hadn't had a reason to look further. "He and Cody grew up together," Mara said. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, which she didn't drink from. "Right here, on these 2 ranches. They were," she chose the next word the way you choose a step in loose rock, "close. For a long time. Since they were kids." A pause. "After Cody died, Eli left. 6 weeks after the funeral, he was gone. Santa Fe, then Denver, I think. He doesn't come back." I waited. "My dad doesn't know," she said. "About what they were to each other." "What, I mean, I knew. I was home the summer before, I could see it. But Cody hadn't told him." And, after she stopped. Started again. "Wade knows. Wade has always known about his son. I think that's part of why he never pushed back on the September conversation. I think Wade understands something about that fence that my father doesn't, and he doesn't know how to say it without. She stopped again. Without what? I said. She looked at her coffee. Without telling my father something about his son that my father isn't ready to hear. The Roadrunner's ceiling fan turned overhead in its slow, arthritic way. The other booth had two old men playing dominoes. The green chile smelled like smoke and summer. I wrote nothing. For the second time in this case, I wrote nothing. Does Holt know any of this? I said. He knows Eli and Cody were close. He thought they were just ranch kids. Growing up. She finally drank the coffee. He's not a cruel man, my father. He's not. He doesn't have any particular opinion about, he just doesn't know. And I don't know how to tell him, and I don't know if it changes anything, and I don't know if it matters, and she put the mug down too hard. Coffee sloshed. I think it matters. I think that's exactly why Wade's cattle have been standing on that ground. I drove home slowly. The desert at night was doing its usual thing of being vast and beautiful and completely indifferent to my specific confusion. June 26, 10:11 p.m. 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Cooling fast. Smells like the well water from the hardware store hose. Eli Calloway. Cody Deering. Close, says Mara. I understand the weight of that word. Wade knows. Holt doesn't. The 14 feet between those fences is doing a lot of work that has nothing to do with grazing rotation. The water line took Holt 2 days to fix. He dug it by hand, which nobody asked him to do. A trenching company could have done it in 2 hours, and, when I asked him why, he said the ground knows when it's been handled by the right person, which was the closest thing to poetry I'd ever heard him produce, so I wrote it down verbatim. By Thursday, the east pasture tanks were full again. By Friday, the weather had climbed past 102 and wasn't apologizing for it. The cattle on both sides of the fence worked the shade where shade existed and stood at water where water existed and did the only thing cattle are equipped to do in a crisis, which is to keep eating. I drove the east pasture road daily that week. Not because anything was happening. Because I had the feeling again that low-frequency body knowledge, the kind the Moleskine can't catch, that something was building. On Friday night, it built. I got to the east pasture road at 11, later than my usual drive-by, and killed the headlights at the gate. Parked. Saturday. No flashlight at the fence tonight. The darkness was complete. But, when my eyes adjusted, I could see in the moonlight that the desert reflects off its white caliche something at the fence line that I needed to look at more carefully. I walked in. Wade Calloway's fence was open. Not cut, opened. A section of Wade's original crossfence had been spread apart, carefully, the wire pulled back and held open with a piece of rebar jammed into the ground. Not recent. Hours old, at least. Through the opening, in Holt's east pasture, 3 of Wade's Angus. Standing at Holt's east tank. Drinking. I stood very still. They were drinking because they were thirsty. They were thirsty because, I was increasingly certain, someone had also been interfering with the Calloway side's water, though that was a thought I filed without certainty. What I was certain of was this: 3 of Wade Calloway's cattle were standing in Holt Deering's east pasture without authorization, and, under Texas and New Mexico ranch custom, Holt had legal right to impound them, charge Wade for recovery costs, and, depending on circumstances, options I wasn't going to think too hard about. The light came on in the east tank shade structure. Not a flashlight. A work lamp. Holt was there. He'd been there. He was crouched next to the rebar-held section of crossfence, his fence now, legally, and he was looking at the 3 cattle at his tank. I watched him. He stood up. He looked at the cattle for a long time. The cattle looked at water and drank. The work lamp turned everything flat and yellow and very clear. Holt walked to his supply shed at the east end of the pasture. He came back with a float valve and a length of PVC pipe. He went to the fence on the Calloway side, his original fence, still standing, and he found the Calloway water line running below it. He located the connection to their east satellite tank. He pulled the float valve. He fixed it. He didn't call me. He didn't call the sheriff. He didn't document the cattle. He didn't touch the cattle. He adjusted the Callaway system float valve and, then, he walked back to the opening in the crossfence and, he moved the cattle back through it, not rushing them, just walking behind them slowly the way you walk cattle when you want them to move without panic. They went through. He removed the rebar. He closed the wire. He didn't wire it, just set it back, roughly aligned. He walked back to his tank and turned off the work lamp. In the dark, I heard him breathing. I could have announced myself. I stayed still instead, because there are moments that belong only to the person inside them, and the right thing is to stand outside and let the person have them. He didn't know I was there. He stood at his tank for 5 minutes. I know because I had my watch face turned so the moonlight hit it. 5 minutes. Then, he walked back toward the ranch house, and the sound of his boots on the caliche faded, and the east pasture went back to being just ground. I wrote about it that night in both logs. The official one, June 29, a property boundary incident, east pasture. No animals injured. No legal action recommended at this time. 3 sentences. Clean. The personal one was longer. He had every right. Every legal and customary right available to a rancher in this state. He could have impounded the cattle and sent Wade a bill and it would have been correct. He fixed their water. He walked their cattle home. He did not do it for Wade. He did not do it because it was kind, or at least not only because of that. He did it the way a man does something when he is trying to be the kind of person that a dead 23-year-old would have recognized. I think that's what it was. I don't know how to write that in an official report. Mara was leaving Sunday. She'd arranged to take Mondays off and come back the following weekend, but she had a job, a life, an Albuquerque 80 miles away that didn't stop for her father's fence dispute and her brother's unfinished story and the particular way grief looks when it wears boots and a Stetson and won't sit down. Saturday afternoon, I stopped by the ranch. She was on the porch. Holt was out on the east pasture on horseback, checking the line. She watched him go and, then, watched the spot where he'd disappeared into the shimmer of the distance. He fixed their water, I said. I'd told her by phone, but I wanted to say it in person, watch her face. She pressed her lips together in the way that is not quite a smile but is made of the same material. Of course he did, she said. He didn't tell you. He won't. That's not, she stopped. Started differently. When Cody was alive, Dad talked. Not about big things. But about the small things. What he'd done that day. What broke. What he fixed. Cody would sit right there, she indicated the chair I was standing next to, and just listen, and my dad would talk to the mountains because he was too private to talk to a person's face, and Cody knew how to receive that. She exhaled, he was very patient. With Dad's way of being. She looked at her hands. I'm not as good at it. I sat down in the chair Cody used to sit in. He's going to destroy something, Mara said. Or he's going to do something the court can't ignore, and it's going to cost him. I can feel it coming. She looked at me. Can you feel it? I thought about the east pasture in the dark. The cattle drinking. The float valve. The sound of boots fading on caliche. Yes, I said. She nodded. Like I'd confirmed a diagnosis. I'm going to tell him, she said. About Eli. About Cody. She said it quietly but with the quality of a decision that had been made somewhere below the level of language, made days ago, and was only now arriving in her mouth as words. I have to. He's fighting something he doesn't understand. He's fighting for something he only has half of. He needs, her jaw tightened briefly. He needs to know who his son was. I looked at the east pasture. When? I said. When I come back, she said. Next weekend. She looked at her hands again. I need to figure out how to say it first. She drove back to Albuquerque Sunday morning. I spent the week working the rest of my caseload: a truck theft in the South County, a noise ordinance situation in Cielo proper involving a man and a rooster with strong opinions, and I drove the East Pasture Road every evening, and I rode in the Moleskine, and the fence was always there, and Holt's flashlight was always there, and the fourth post was always there, and nothing escalated and nothing resolved, and the whole thing sat in suspension the way the high desert sometimes suspends you in summer, in heat that has no end date, waiting for something to break. The hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Wednesday morning, I drove out to the ranch to remind him. The house was empty. The truck was gone. I went to the barn. Empty. I went around the east side of the property. The fence was gone. Not moved. Not relocated. Gone. Both the new fence Holt had set in June and the old crossfence Wade had built in 2012, and the original boundary markers and the staples and the wire, all of it stripped out, the posts pulled, the wire rolled. 700 yards of shared fence line, 200 years of Deering-Callaway boundary, just gone. The ground ran continuous and unmarked from one property into the other, the legal boundary invisible now, the way all boundaries are invisible until someone draws them. I stood at the fourth post's location. Just ground. The post was gone too. I called Briggs. I called Mara. I stood in the unmarked space between two properties and I looked at the mountains and I said a word I don't use often, and then I wrote in the Moleskine, July 7th, Wednesday. 8:03 a.m. 82 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the east. He took the fence down. All of it. He's not here. I knew where he was. I got in the truck. He was standing at the center of it when I arrived. 200 yards of bare ground running north to south, the fence line stripped down to nothing, the caliche pale and undisturbed where the posts had been. 700 yards in total, if you ran the whole boundary. All of it gone. Holt Deering stood in the middle of that absence in the early morning light with his hat off and his arms at his sides, and he looked less like a man who had done something than like a man who had finally stopped doing something. I got out of the truck without slamming the door. He heard me anyway. Turned. His face had the quality of a landscape the morning after a hard storm, everything rearranged slightly, the features more prominent, the lines deeper, the whole thing quieter than before. Holt, I said. Deputy. I looked at the bare line. The sky above it was doing what the sky does at 8 in the morning in July in the high desert, which is to say everything. Where are the posts? I said. Barn. All of them? A pause. Most of them. I understood which one was not in the barn. The hearing's tomorrow, I said. I know it. This, I gestured at the stripped boundary. The word "this" was not adequate to what it was pointing at, but I used it anyway. This is going to become the central issue. Not the 14 feet. This. I know what it is. Contempt. Property destruction. Wade can sue for the cost of the crossfence. Raymond Toole is going to walk into that courtroom with a photograph of this, and he is going to, I know. He said it without sharpness. Without anything, really. The way you say "I know" when the consequences have already been weighed and found acceptable, and the weighing happened at a level below where court costs live. I stood next to him in the bare strip. The morning heat was building. An insect made its repetitive comments somewhere in the grass. Why? I said. He looked north along the line. Then, south. I was tired, he said, of looking at the wrong place. Wade Callaway arrived 40 minutes later. I'd called the moment I parked the truck. I'd known it the same way you know weather. He came up the Callaway side road in his truck, moving faster than usual, and he got out before the truck had entirely stopped, which told me he'd seen the fence was gone from a distance, that the distance had been enough to change something in his chest. He walked up to the boundary and stopped. He looked at the bare ground. He looked at Holt. Holt looked back. The two of them standing on their respective sides of a line that was no longer visible, which meant they were, in a way, both standing on the same undefended ground for the first time in a very long time. Holt. Wade's voice had a thing in it I hadn't heard from him before. Wade. You pulled the whole fence. I did. My cross fence. My posts, your posts are in my barn. Not defensive. Informational. You can have them when this is done. Wade's jaw tightened. When what is done? The question sat between them. An insect moved through the grass. The morning pressed down. You should have told me, Holt said. Quiet. September. When I came to you in September. You knew something I didn't and you didn't tell me. Wade went very still. I don't know what you Mara told me. Holt said it straight. Not as an accusation. As a fact, the way he delivered all facts, just their weight, no velocity. About Cody. About Eli. He looked at the ground between them. Mara told me last week. I had taken one step back. I was not writing. I was not breathing very much. Wade's voice had changed completely. Something had left it. The calmness that had been his armor all summer, that pressed Wrangler attorney having civic reasonableness, it was gone. What was underneath it was just a man who was also 63 and, also tired and, also carrying something that had been in him for 3 years without a place to put it. I wasn't sure what you knew. I thought maybe Cody had, he hadn't, Holt said. Wade put his hand on the top rail of his original fence, the one that was still standing on the far side of the bare ground, the one that didn't adjoin the dispute at all. Just the far fence. His hand gripped it. Eli hasn't come back, Wade said. Since the funeral. He calls his mother. He doesn't, his throat worked. He doesn't come home. Holt looked at him. Do you know why? Holt said. Wade shook his head once. It was the smallest motion I'd ever seen him make. A very large man making himself very small, the way grief does to men who've never learned any other shape for it. Because he thinks I wouldn't want him here, Holt said. That's what Mara thinks. That Eli left because he believed I wouldn't, he stopped. Started differently. My son was 23 years old. He was, for the first time, the structure of Holt's composure showed a crack. Not a break. A crack. The kind that happens in walls that are load-bearing, the wall doesn't fall, but the crack is there and it means something. He was himself. All of himself. And I didn't know all of it, and now I can't, he stopped again. The crack held. The wall held. I pulled the fence, he said, because I wanted there to be no line here. For a while. I wanted there to be no line between, he looked up at Wade. At the bare ground between them. I wanted Eli to be able to come back without there being a line. I don't know if that made sense to Wade. I don't know if it made complete sense to Holt. It was the kind of thing that doesn't need to make complete sense. It made the sense that grief makes, which is its own grammar. Wade let go of the fence. He walked forward across the bare ground, across the legal boundary, across the dispute, across 40 years, and he stopped in the middle of it, and Holt stood there, and neither of them did anything at all. Then, Wade said, he loved your boy. Holt's head went down. It stayed down. He nodded once. I was at the edge of the east pasture with my hand on the truck door and my moleskine in my pocket, and I did not open it. I thought about opening it. I thought about all the things I might write down, the specific morning light, the quality of the silence, the two old men standing in the unmarked strip between their properties with their whole bodies arranged around something that had no language yet. I got in the truck. I drove back to Cielo. I gave them the morning. The hearing was Thursday. Holt showed up in a clean shirt. That was the first thing I noticed. Not a dress shirt, just a button-up, ironed, tucked in, which for a man who exists primarily in work clothes represented a level of formality that was almost ceremonially pointed. Mara sat beside him at the table. She'd driven out Wednesday night. She had her hand on the table next to his but, not touching it, in the specific proximity of a daughter who wants to offer something and isn't sure it will be accepted. Raymond Toole presented the photographs of the stripped fence line. Wade sat across the table and did not look at the photographs. Judge Alva Reyes looked at them for a long time. The legal findings took an hour. The county surveyor's documentation was clear. The 14 feet belonged to Holt Deering by every applicable standard of New Mexico property law. The court ruled accordingly. Holt won the 14 feet. The boundary was redrawn, officially, in the county's records, and the Callaway crossfence would need to be rebuilt at Callaway's expense at the correct location, 14 feet east of where it had stood. The court also ruled that the unilateral destruction of existing fence infrastructure constituted property damage. Holt would be responsible for the cost of replacing the destroyed crossfence materials. Raymond Toole produced an estimate, $4,200. Holt looked at the number on the document. He didn't change his expression. Accepted, he said. His attorney, a man named Del Garrett who wore actual suits and looked vaguely panicked at all times, put a hand on Holt's arm. Holt moved his arm away with the patience of a man removing an obstacle. Accepted, he said again. After, in the courthouse parking lot, in the heat that was doing its sincere best, Mara stood with her arms folded, which was not angry but was a specific kind of controlled. $4,000. I know it, Holt said. You own the 14 feet. I do. And it cost you $4,000 and a contempt, Mara. He looked at her. The morning light was flat and honest on his face, and there was something in it I'd been watching for since June, something that had been coiled and internal for 3 years had changed its shape. Not gone. Not resolved. But different. The way a broken bone changes shape when it heals, denser in the broken place. Heavier. But whole. I own the 14 feet. And there's no fence on the line. She looked at him. Not yet, she said. Not yet, he agreed. She looked like she wanted to say 6 different things. She said none of them. She put her hand on his arm, not gently, the way you'd console someone, but firmly, the way you hold something you're not ready to put down. He covered her hand with his. One beat. Then, they both looked at their separate distances, the way Deerings apparently look at things, side by side, same direction, together and private at once. I wrote that down. I looked at it. I thought about crossing it out. Left it. I drove out to the ranch one last time. Not officially. Not because anything had happened. Just out. July 10th, Thursday. 4:47 p.m. 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Light from the west turning everything copper. The East Pasture Road in the late afternoon is a different thing than it is at dawn. The shadows run long and the light does something specific to the caliche that makes it look like the ground is generating heat from within. The fence line was bare, the posts gone, the wire rolled. The boundary ran invisible across the land the way all boundaries eventually do when no one is enforcing them. I parked. I walked to where the 4th post had been. The ground was clean. He'd pulled the post carefully, no tearing, no gouging. The hole had been filled in and tamped. You'd have to know exactly where to look to find it. I walked to the barn. The barn door was open. Holt was inside, not working on anything, just standing near the back wall with a coffee that was cold. He saw me. He didn't say anything. He looked at the wall behind him. The 4th post was there. He'd stood it against the back wall of the barn, T-post end down, upright. He'd cleaned it, or maybe it had always been clean, driven straight and right in March 3 years ago by the same hands that had fixed the water and set the wire and done the patient things. It stood against the barn wall the way a tool stands when it's not in use but is too useful to put away. You kept it, I said. I did. I stood next to him. We both looked at the post. What happens now? I said. Rebuild the line, he said. Correct location. He drank the cold coffee. I'll need a crew. You going to call Wade? He looked at me sideways. The scar along his jaw caught the barn light. I might, he said. His boy knows fencing. He meant Pico Torres, Wade's ranch hand. He might have meant something else. I didn't ask. Mara called Eli, he said. I waited. Yesterday. She called him. He set the coffee down on a workbench. Told him things had changed. On the line. He looked at the post. I don't know if he'll come. I don't know if he needs to. But she told him there was no fence on the boundary and there wouldn't be one for a while, and that if he wanted to come out and see the land he grew up on, there was nothing in the way. I held very still. What did he say? I asked. Holt shook his head slightly. Meaning, I don't know. Or meaning, that part isn't mine to hold yet. Or both. The line'll need to go back in before winter, he said. Cattle need boundaries. He looked at the post. But, not yet. I drove back to Cielo in the copper late afternoon. Route 9 running west, the mesa's going purple ahead of me, the sky doing everything it does in that last hour before it gives up the light. I opened the Moleskine at my kitchen table. The wobble in the table. The turpentine smell. The stacked pages of this summer's record, official and unofficial, the two sets of notes I'd been keeping like two separate accounts of the same country. July 10, 6:22 p.m. Temperature dropping. Wind from the northwest, finally. The fence is gone. The 14 feet belong to Holt. The fourth post is in the barn. Eli Calloway has not returned to Cienega County in 3 years. He may be in Denver. He may be somewhere with a different name by now. He may come back, or he may have learned the way some people learn the hard way, that certain ground holds too much to stand on. Holt Deering won the property dispute by every legal standard available, and the whole thing cost him $4,000 and a summer and something I don't have a word for yet. Wade Calloway rebuilt his crossfence in the correct location, 14 feet east, in August. I know because I drove by. The fence runs straight. I don't know who set the posts. Mara calls her father on Sundays now. She told me this in passing. She didn't say what they talk about. I expect they talk about small things, what broke, what was fixed, what the water situation is on the east pasture. I expect her father talks to the mountains again. I went out to the barn once more, last week. The fourth post is still there, against the back wall, standing upright. Holt has begun using it as something to hang things on, a coil of wire, a set of hobbles, a hat he doesn't use much anymore. It is becoming useful in the way of something that has been given a new purpose without losing its original one. I asked Briggs once, early in all this, what the difference was between a property dispute and whatever Holt Deering was doing. I understand the difference now. The property dispute was the container. What was inside it was a man trying to hold the last physical thing that his son had touched and had made well, and trying to hold it against a world that keeps turning and keeps requiring fences to be in different places and keeps having a specific indifference to what the ground means to the people who have worked it their whole lives and buried their grief in it, because where else do you put it out here, where else does it go? He held it. The line is different now. 14 feet different. The fence will go back up before winter. The fourth post will stay where it is. I capped the pen. Sat with it. Through the window above the hardware store, the desert had gone from copper to charcoal, the way it does, the way it always does, without apology or announcement. I opened the Moleskine again. Turned to a clean page. July 10th Addendum. Sheriff Briggs asked me this week if I wanted to transfer back to Albuquerque. Said there was an opening in the Northeast District. Better hours, more cases, better everything by any quantifiable measure. I told him I needed a few more days to think about it. I looked at that for a long time. Then, I wrote below it, June 14th was 7 weeks ago. I have used 2 full moleskines. Then, the green chili at the Roadrunner is still the best thing in this county. Then, I closed the notebook and did not open it again that night, which for me is as close to peace as it gets. Outside, the high desert was doing what it always does. Enduring. Making the rest of us feel like we should be better at it. Somewhere east, in the dark, a fence line ran invisible across unmarked ground. The cattle knew where the boundary was. They always know. They'd stand at it in the morning and look across it with the specific equanimity of animals that have never been confused about what a line is for. The fourth post stood in the dark of the barn, wearing a coil of wire and a hat. Straight. Tight. Better than his father. Final entry, field log, Deputy Art Callahan, Cienega County Sheriff's Department case file, Deering Callaway East Pasture, dispute ref 2024-119 status, adjudicated. Notes, see attached. Personal notes, see nowhere.